Uhuru, brothers, sisters, and comrades. This is Omali Yeshitela. I'm chairman of the African People's Socialist Party, and I'm leader of the Uhuru movement and the International African Revolution. I want to welcome everyone here, and I want to start this discussion having to do with Trump's visit on yesterday to Kenosha, where in the aftermath of the rebellions and the protests that have been occurring there following the police murder of Jacob Blake. And in many ways, the last two discussions I think that we had related to that. But it's something that we have to continue to talk about, because this visit by Trump and everything that's happened in Kenosha subsequent to Jacob Blake's shooting, he is, as I understand it, recovering in the hospital, though there's some question of whether or not he's been permanently paralyzed. But ever since the mobilizations have occurred there, we have also had to watch these farces that are the conventions for the Democratic and Republican parties, where the president and vice president of both of these parties have been formally put forward as representatives of the parties for this contest for president of the United States. And this is important because I do want to talk to you. I want to talk to you about the fact that what we are witnessing with Trump's going to Kenosha, with the rebellions and the struggles that's happening there, is part of a crisis of a social system. We call it imperialism. We call it the colonial capitalist system. And so this system is in a state of crisis. And of the African People's Socialist Party that I chair, we understand that the system that we're talking about is a system that is based on colonialism, colonial slavery, that the whole system got its start through kidnapping African people some 600 years ago when Portugal first in 1415 kidnapped African people and initiated the transatlantic trade in black bodies that resulted not only in African people being held in the most horrific kinds of conditions since then in the United States and other parts of the world, but resulted in a really serious blow to the development of Africa that today, even as we have this discussion, still lives under the domination or exists under the domination of imperialist white power. And there's a contest that's happening there on the continent of Africa also that is a reflection of the crisis of this social system. So it's important to mention that we are looking at a system in a state of crisis, and that this visit by Trump to Kenosha reflected this state of crisis in some ways, and it also was something that a campaign ploy by the president of the United States to win white people in this country to voting for him in the face of the growing resistance of colonized people in this country and around the world, sparked by the May 25th murder of George Floyd, and which happened, of course, in Minnesota. And so in the face of this, we saw in almost every state, and large and small cities, rural and urban centers, suburban centers, people who never participated in many instances, any kind of demonstrations at all, they were in motion. And with such an intensity that articles in the New York Times indicated that so many people, and the demonstrations were so ubiquitous on a regular basis that in other places around the world, they have led to actual removing governments from power. That's how significant the mobilizations were. And so now, as a consequence of that, as a consequence of white people having to see not just the murder of George Floyd, but to see the resistance of the African population here and how infectious that was in terms of the resistance of peoples around the world. We saw for the first time, perhaps ever, the majority of white people in this country being, according to polls indicating that they felt like African people in this country were getting mistreated by the so-called criminal justice system, and that African people in this country were not treated fairly overall. And that was an extraordinary kind of thing. And so we've seen this as part of what's happening within the context of this whole electoral process, which was made it so important for us of the African People's Socialist Party and the Uhuru movement to try to give some kind of definition to what was going on, to move it beyond just the empty slogans of Black Lives Matter, to try to say that this resistance, these rebellions, these uprisings must have a stronger message, a bigger message. We must introduce science into the spontaneity that's occurring. That was one of the reasons we had to do that. So now we see that as a consequence of the uprisings initially, as a consequence of the coronavirus in particular, many people were seeming to move away from support for Trump, or several people moving away from support for Trump, and we're moving in the direction of Biden, and in terms of preference for presidency. And of course, this made some sense if the only thing you can see in terms of solution of trying to deal with the problem is either Biden or Trump. And so Trump, looking at his own future, and sectors of the ruling class who work with Trump and who support Trump, who see Trump as carrying out their interests as well, moving seriously to try, obviously, to put forth their own agenda and put forth their own spin on what was happening, and to deflect and turn around the support that seemed to be given to Biden into the struggle of African people. So you have this conversion of interests of a certain sort, where a sector of the ruling class itself needed to move African people and other colonized people closer to it in its pursuit of the presidency. So you had that happening on the one hand, and then you had, of course, the African people ourselves wanting the end of the oppression that happens to us on a regular basis, the exploitation that we are confronted with all the time. And so here you have this scenario, and then Trump and the bourgeoisie that he represents are now intervening, and they want to change the narrative by making the question one of violence and crime and law and order, as opposed to what's happening to African people. And so Trump goes to Kenosha to be able to get photo ops. And Kenosha is, as you know, it is in Wisconsin, considered one of the swing states that could make a difference in whether or not who gets elected. It can make a difference in terms of the electoral college, which is going to be important and going to be the essential question about the election for presidency. So Trump goes there. He gets the photo ops that he wants. He goes to places where he can show buildings having been damaged, torched, and what have you. He speaks to a sympathetic audience who are so happy to see him show up. He has a press conference that's attended by several sympathizers of Trump who really are happy that he came to Kenosha, despite the fact that the mayor and the governor of Wisconsin was trying to get him not to come to Wisconsin because they claimed they felt like he would exacerbate the contradiction, but they were Democrats who had to also be concerned with what they know to be the case. And that case is that white people are afraid of Black people. White people are afraid of resistance when it gets too close to home, when it looks like it might really upset the apple cart. And so they were trying to play on the fears of these white people, saying that you'd be better off with Trump here, because if you don't have Trump, you're going to have cities burned to the ground. And there's always the specter of white women being raped, et cetera. And that's not far-fetched. We saw that happen when Trump won the first election, and he made the Mexicans and the Spanish-speaking colonized people coming across the border, the so-called, the undocumented workers, they were the rapists and criminals, and that was just Trump. But this is something that they've used forever and ever, because even in the election for George Herbert Walker Bush, when he ran against Dukakis in 1988, pulled out the so-called Willie Horton ad. And Horton was an African who had been involved in a furlough, a prison furlough project that was presided over by Dukakis, who was the governor then of Massachusetts. And while on furlough, he allegedly raped a white woman. And so this became the albatross that they hung on Dukakis' neck, and used that, and playing on the historically rabid anti-African sentiments in this country among white people that's just below the surface. And so this is what Trump went there to do. And he held this press conference. He sat down with people who truly expressed love and appreciation for him coming, the president of the United States coming to Kenosha. And Kenosha is a city of about 100,000 or so people. It's one of those places right close to the Illinois border. And Chicago, Africans who are trying to get Section 8 in Chicago are sent to Kenosha for Section 8. That's to say, you can't get it in Chicago, so they ship you out, just like in certain other urban areas in this country, as a part of the process of removal and even gentrification. They move Africans out who are trying to get social services. And so in this instance, many Africans who want to get Section 8 are shipped from Chicago into Kenosha. So you have a sizable African population there. And this is where this young brother was shot and almost killed. And Trump characterizing the demonstrations and protests as domestic terror. And he's really throwing red meat to the white people who he assumes can be mobilized, can be won to his side in opposition to Biden. And then you have Trump says that he's bringing $1 million to the cops in Kenosha. He's going to reward them. He's going to give a $4 million to help the small businesses there. He's going to win that support. And $42 million he's going to support what he calls public safety in Wisconsin. Of course, public safety does not include Jacob Blake and people like Jacob Blake, the African who was murdered by the police there. In fact, in response to questions, Trump indicated that he didn't think that there was any systemic problem with the police department. He didn't think that there was what they characterize as systemic racism or anything with the police department. He thought the police department was doing a wonderful job and was protecting the people, and that his president, as I say, Trump, bringing in forces that could do what is necessary to subdue the African population is what was sure to bring security. And so Trump has picked up that message. And that message is one that's designed in part, again, to win the swing voters, white people, who some of whom perhaps even wanted to offer some kind of support to Black people in this struggle for rights. And then, but we see that there's been an ongoing deterioration, an erosion of popular support among the white people for the movement that's characterized as Black Lives Matter in Minnesota. We've seen that eroding. And so Biden is the one who is being put forth. And Trump, by the way, when he talked about terrorism, et cetera, had nothing to say about Jacob Blake. His shooting had nothing to say about what happens to African people on a regular basis by police and other means of colonial domination. He didn't mention 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, who shot 3 people and killed 2 of them in Kenosha and what have you. The thing he said about Rittenhouse when asked a question was it looked like Rittenhouse was involved in self-defense, et cetera. And so that was something that was understandable. So he's clearly throwing red meat to what he assumes to be a frothing at the mouth white audience that's willing to go with him in opposition to Black people that Biden is being put forth as a supporter of. So we have that kind of situation. And so many people, you hear people saying anybody other than Trump, that they got to vote for Trump, get Trump out. And so and some saying that they're going to hold their nose and vote for Biden, despite the fact that they have problem with Biden. And there's good reason to have problem with Biden. The fact is that Biden is the author of the crime bill written, I think in 1994, something like that, that was implemented when Clinton came into office. And the crime bill was one that Clinton promised he was going to put 100,000 police in this country, and everybody knew that Clinton was talking about putting them there for African people, and everybody knew this. This was like, code words to the white population that they were going to be protected from Black people by putting 100,000 cops in the country. And when Biden did this, from the 1980s up until now, the prison population exploded. So by 500%. So 500% more people put in prison in this gulag, if you will. And of course, the majority of them are African people and other colonized people in this country. Biden did that. And so it's not like Trump has invented targeting African people or holding up African people as demons. And there are things you can Google now. You can see Biden talking about throw them in jail, death in this kind of thing, speaking about the people who he wants to be thrown in prison. And so, and by the way, people talked about how Trump refused to condemn so-called systemic racism and the police department. So is Biden. Up to now, Biden didn't do it. He was asked to do it. In fact, Biden has made sure that he is letting everybody know that he's a supporter of the police. He is, in fact, the guy who he says can have both the cops and the people, I guess the protesters, sit down at the same table. And he could probably have some of the protesters at the same table because, as you know, a huge sector, a large sector of the respectable protesters in this country are wings of the Democratic Party, fronts of the Democratic Party. Like the thing that we just saw happen over the weekend, which was a turn out the vote march and mobilization and rally in Washington, D.C. that was chaired by Al Sharpton, but clearly was a turn out the vote thing for the Democratic Party. And so, and then, we have the Black Lives Matter, which is a wing of the Democratic Party as well. So this is what we're looking at when we're looking at Biden, and Trump understands this, and Biden understands this, and part of what is happening, of course, is that we're looking at a contest between two different sectors of the ruling class. They're not fighting about us. Neither Biden nor Trump had anything to say about a program that's going to uplift African people who are suffering and catching hell. Catching hell from coronavirus, catching hell from a history of oppression, exploitation of African people. Not one of them spoke to that. Neither of Trump nor Biden was able to speak to that. But what Biden has done, because he requires, like the Democratic Party has required for a long time, support from an African part of the population and many of the other people who they characterize as minorities, colonized people. So here you got the bourgeoisie playing us in this fight, this contest they have with each other. None of them even speaking to our issues, but they're in a contest with each other. And so they are using us. The Trump administration of that wing of the ruling class uses us as boogeyman to scare the white population, the colonizers in this country. And the Bidens, they use us to be able to mobilize us to vote for their program, for the program of another sector of the ruling class. Neither of them, neither Biden nor Trump, put forth anything that even looks like a solution for African people. But what Biden does do is that he gets Kamala Harris as his vice presidential candidate. And the significance of that is that Trump Biden is trying to be Trump light. Biden is trying to win the same white people. That's why he was such an attractive candidate for a sector of the Democratic Party establishment, because he could perhaps challenge Trump's for the white vote that Trump has got now that used to go to the Democratic Party. So Biden is trying to win those people back to the Democratic Party and back to voting for him. And in the process of trying to win them, then that means he can't say a damn thing that's going to shake them up when it comes to standing up for Black people and Black power. But he's got Kamala. Kamala doesn't say anything about Black people either, but she's Black, like Obama. So she can wink an eye. She can have her Alpha Kappa, whatever the Greek organization that she belonged to at Howard University, come out. But she is a former prosecutor in California. California does not have a reputation for being kind and gentle with African people, with Mexican people, and other people who come through that criminal justice system. And so here you have Biden with the reputation of bringing African people, bringing more cops to our communities to put us in the jail, to take us to the courthouse, and to execute us on the streets of this country. And then you have Kamala Harris, the prosecutor, who is going to carry out the will of the police in terms of giving us time in jail. That's not much of a choice. That's the kind of thing that we are looking at right now. So, and again, this police question is not a small question. We're not just talking about the Glee Club or something like that. The police are arms of a state. They're arms of coercion. They're arms of oppression. They have always been. They're nothing else other than that. People talked about, well, we like the good cops. I heard somebody talking about the popular civil rights organization who was saying that we are not anti-police, we're just anti-bad police. And the fact is, we don't care if a cop is somebody who believes that people should wait to get married before they lose their virginity, or help little old ladies to cross the street. That's not the question. The thing is, the police function as an arm of the state, and the state is an institution that came into existence at a time the society was split between haves and have-nots. And of course, the greatest split in human society that has ever occurred has been that split between African people who were enslaved and the white people who enslaved us. And the police function as a form of the state to maintain this relationship between the slave and the enslaved. The slave and the enslaved. So to say, I like good cops is really not even getting the point. The police are an institutionalized presence that have a particular function in society. That is to protect the system as it is, to protect the ruling class as it is. And that's what we're looking at when we look at the state. So this is not some kind of simplistic issue question that we're talking about the police, whether you like the police or not. And then, of course, there's this ongoing struggle that many people have fallen victim to, where the question is whether or not the police are justified in coming out and doing what they can to do about violence. And part of what this whole struggle is about, part of this whole discussion, is a demand that African people stop fighting back, stop doing everything that we can to defend ourselves against cops and white people who come and kill us and create horrible offenses against us. That makes us responsible then. If white people go and vote for Trump because they're afraid of Black people, then we are the ones who are responsible for Trump's victory. When the truth could not be further away from that scenario. The police function as arms of the state. That's what they are all the time. They're not that sometime, they're that all the time. That's what they are. So when we look at this election and how people are now trying to say that the violence is such a problem, and that's allowing them to define our reality. And the first problem with that is this silly assumption. It's not silly. People have been doing it for a long time. If you don't have any other explanation, then you borrow the explanation from the oppressor. If the oppressed is not armed with our own philosophy, our own worldview, then we end up borrowing the philosophy of the ruling class. And the ruling class tells us that our problem is racism. In other words, our problem is the fact that white people don't like us. And that's all racism is. I don't care how they try to dress it up by talking about institutional racism versus some other kind of racism. They're talking about the fact that white people don't like us. And they say, well, institutional racism is when you have institutions who carry out this and carry out that act. Well, most people around the world call that colonialism. And we cannot be confused about that issue. Colonialism is the problem that African people are confronted with here in the United States and around the world. And many other peoples are confronted with the problem of colonialism. The Mexicans are confronted with that problem. The people who they like to refer to as Native Americans are confronted with this problem of colonial domination. And we are confronted with this problem all around the world. And colonialism requires a different kind of solution than racism. Racism, you make the people like you if you can. You become as much like the people who are oppressing you as you can. Colonialism means that you get them off your back, that you overturn the relationship with, you get rid of them, you get them out your life and what have you. And it doesn't mean that you're able to do it right now. But it does mean that that has to be your long-term view. That's the thing that you're working at day to day to day. And everything you do right now, you want it to take you to that place where you get rid of the colonial domination, foreign and alien domination over Black people, whether they call it Democrat or Republican or anything else. One. The other thing that we mean, that's the state that we want to talk about. It's a colonial state. And the other thing that needs to be extremely clear is that when you're looking at the election, that the election is simply a non-violent contest between sectors of the ruling class. The ruling class, the white power ruling class, is not some monolithic group of people. They have, even though they all are capitalists and colonialists, and even though they all can unite with colonial domination of African people, they have their specific kinds of interests. And these campaigns give them an opportunity to be able to put forward their own specific kinds of interests, and they pay people to do that. And that's what Trump was talking about in 2016 when he was saying the people who he was running against were people who were paid to say what they say, and they couldn't say what he could say because nobody was paying him to say it. And that was true. They were paid. And now almost every presidential candidate you've ever seen has had a campaign manager that is a lobbyist, that's worked for a specific or a number of corporations. And that's the intent is to get their agenda put out by these candidates and get masses of people who are otherwise victimized by the system, victimized by the capitalists, to participate in their own oppression by voting for one capitalist or another capitalist and to give them what appears to be a mandate for carrying out their oppression against us and other peoples around the world. That's what the election is. There's no way you can get around that. And some people say, well, what we need then is a third party. We need a third party, or we need other parties. You can have 3, 15, 20 parties. Israel had a whole bunch of parties. And there are other countries. I think Italy has a number of other countries. England has a number of parties. That's not the question. The question is whether these are parties that are opposed to colonialism and capitalism, whether they are parties of revolution or whether they are parties that's trying to fit into the existing social system. If you have 3 parties that's trying to vying for a space within the social system, then you still got the social system. You still got police murder. You still got capitalism. You still got colonialism. You still got hunger. You still got war and the threat of war. You still got the absence of healthcare for the people. That's what you got under the system, no matter how many parties you put forth. Or you get some feeble thing that $15 an hour after a number of years, as Bernie Sanders brought to us. So we are talking about a social system that is in a state of crisis because it rests upon the foundation of slavery and colonialism and has institutionalized this relationship. And all around the world, it's sucking resources, sucking blood from the people. And then what has happened is people around the world are fighting back, trying to take these resources. That's why the United States government is attacking Iran. That's why the United States government is attacking Venezuela and other countries, because people are trying to take back their resources. And to the extent they're successful in taking back their resources, then that means that their crisis happens inside this country that's relied on the resources, not just for the ruling class, but for student loans, to students to get their loans, for old white people, for 401ks and things like that. Their retirement future is flashing before their eyes, which is why it's so easy for these politicians to move white people and others. in some kind of way that seems to be against their interests in many ways, but they're fighting for what they perceive to be their interests because they understand that much of what they have comes as a consequence of taking it from other peoples and other countries inside this country and around the world. So what has to happen? It won't happen overnight, I know that, but I do know this, that you will never get there unless you start fighting for the future. And the future is to become independent of both the Democrat and Republican parties and all of them. And I know I'm not telling you not to vote for this person, to vote for that person. I'm saying that you have to begin organizing for the future. The Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations worked for years to pull together a national Black agenda for self-determination for Black people. We say you should hold everybody, every candidate to this national Black political agenda. You should fight for this national Black political agenda. And if there's a Democrat you want to fight or support, then make them support something for you. You just can't give Biden your vote and he doesn't say a damn thing that's going to move anything forward for you. You can't give it to Kamala, the prosecutor, and she's not saying a damn thing about reparations. She's not saying a damn thing about freeing all these people in the prisons, not freeing the political prisoners, people who put their lives on the line so somebody like Kamala Harris could even stand up and say, I'm running for office. You can't do that. You have to be able to make them respond to you. If you don't do that, you'll be slave forever. And beyond that, we have to put Africa on the agenda as well. Africa, which is the birthright of Black people around the world. I hear people talking about they're doing this to our country. No, this is not your country. This is the country of the indigenous people that's been ripped off, stolen, and they're in concentration camps called Indian reservation and barrios throughout this country, and they're suffering like hell. We have to unite with those people against the ruling class in this country, and sometimes those people might be just like you, and your neighbor might not be smart enough at this moment to understand who the enemy is. We have to educate them. That takes time. We have to organize them. That takes time. And then we have to overturn this foul relationship we have with this social system. If we break with this social system, it cannot stand up. It will collapse. Just as it's suffering as a consequence of people around the world doing that, here we are in the belly of the beast. We turn our back on America, and America can't stand up. So that's what we have to do. So I want you to think about that. Think about the Black is Back Coalition that's having its 11th annual, 12th actual mobilization in Washington, D.C., a rally in Washington, D.C. This is going to be from November 6th through November 8th. We're going to have a rally on the 7th at Malcolm X Park, and we're going to march from Malcolm X Park to the White House. And then across the street from the White House at Lafayette Park, we're going to have another rally. And then after that, on the following day, we're going to have a conference, and this conference is titled Black Power Matter, Down with Colonialism, Black Community Control of the Police. I want to see you there. Go to blackisbackcoalition.org and go to apspuhuru.org. Thank you, brothers and sisters. We can win this one. We are winning. Uhuru.